Good morning, everybody. Today is March 17th, 2020. So, I know you're out of the classroom right now. You're at your own home. You're on YouTube. You're watching this video. That's great. We got you in the right spot. Now, let's get going. Let's check out the agenda. So, of course, we have our welcome and expectations like we do every morning. You guys are going to be a part of that. We're going to do our standard and our essential question. It's going to take us about 2 minutes. We're going to go through our early Greece PowerPoint, and then we have an exit ticket. But I want to start out with something cool. So, today in history. This day in history, in 1959, the 14th Dalai Lama flees Tibet and goes to India. If you remember that movie we watched, Kunin, a few months ago, this is directly tying into that. Okay, so the Dalai Lama had to end up fleeing Tibet, and he fled into India from China. And that happened on March 17th, 1959. And then on March 17th, 1985, President Ronald Reagan saw that there was an issue with acid rain. Acid rain is a type of rain that caused by pollution, that causes a lot of destruction in the environment. So he joined with Canada to begin a study on how to prevent acid rain, and that's something we're still working on today. My announcements. So make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to receive notifications when I post new videos. This is how I'm going to make sure that you guys are getting the lessons that I need to get to you, so we can make sure that you're getting the information you need even though you're away from school. And on Thursday, you're going to begin a research project on the Greek gods / demigods / heroes. Start thinking about who you want to cover. Maybe it's Athena, or you want to cover someone like Jason and the Argonauts. It's your time to really start thinking about who you want to talk about. And I'm going to have a list to you on Wednesday so that you can really think about who you want. But just go ahead and get an idea in your head. All right, let's talk about my expectations. So the impact of COVID-19 and the effects to slow its spread have changed the traditional classroom learning environment. It's going to change the way we do things. It's going to change the way I teach and the way you learn. But hopefully the way we do this won't be interrupted. Hopefully you're going to get the information that you need so that you can continue to learn and you can come back ready to go with more information. And it's another way we can make sure that you guys don't have to come back during the summer. So make sure you're paying attention. My other expectation is today we're going to be using YouTube as a tool to learn about ancient Greek history. So YouTube can be used as a learning medium, and I know you've already used that before, and today we're going to use it as well. And my expectation is that you watch the video, pause when you need to take notes. So guys, I'm going to be moving kind of quick because you're not in the classroom. I don't have my cues to check to see, hey, who's still writing? And so I'm not going to be able to slow down. That means you're going to have to pause the video and get the information you need. It also gives you an opportunity to go back and listen to what I'm saying. Again, remember when I ask you to take notes, it's not just to write down everything that's on the slide, but rather what am I saying and how does that go with the information on the slide? Again, the slide is for me, but it's also for you. So let's take the time, you can pause it, take the notes you need, and move on. And my expectation is that, guys, that you continue to comment by asking questions, or continue to ask questions by asking them in the comment section on this video. I'm going to leave that open for you guys to make sure you can ask questions that you need clarification on. You can also send me an email to ask those questions as well. And then, of course, there's going to be an exit ticket at the end of the video. I need you guys to fill those questions out, and you're going to send those to me via my email, which you already have. That has gone out to you. Check your Edmodo. I'm not going to post it on a YouTube video, but I want to make sure that you guys have the opportunity to get to it. Now, let's talk about our essential question. What cultures and peoples helped to establish ancient Greece? I want you to think about that, because that's what we're going to try to answer today. And then our standard is, I can recognize significant events, figures, and contributions of classical civilizations like Phoenicia, Greece, Rome, and Axum. Let's get started. The birth of ancient Greece. Life in an inhospitable land. I'm saying inhospitable because Greece really is covered in mountains. Now, could people live there? Absolutely. But the traditional farming that we see in every other civilization that we've studied, whether it's the Indus River Valley civilizations, or the Yellow River Valley civilization, or maybe even we're looking at Mesopotamia with the Tigris and Euphrates or the Nile River. Everyone had these massive rivers that provided lots of rich nutrients to grow lots of crops. We don't see that in Greece. In fact, 80% of the land is rocky mountains. So only a small portion of it could even be used for farming. So we don't see so much farming in ancient Greece. as much as we see a lot of sailing. And they sailed around to go fishing. Fishing became a very important resource to the Greeks. They also explored. They used colonization, a practice of moving from one place to another and building a colony. So the United States originally were colonies of Great Britain. Great Britain colonized the Americas and created 13 colonies. From those 13 colonies, we became the United States. We broke away, we declared our independence. But for a time period, we belonged to Great Britain. We were part of their possessions. So the Greeks, while they lived somewhat on Greece, they began to spread out into the islands in the Aegean Sea and working all their way over to Turkey and Anatolia to create colonies there as well. So let's dive in. Greek history. Greek history is told to us through the works of ancient Greek historians. We also find archaeological evidence and other things that are written down by a lot of Romans wrote a lot about the Greeks as well. But some of the great Greek historians that we know of are Ovid, Thucydides, and Herodotus. And see, these are some of the more famous Greek historians, although we also know about other people that tell stories as well. Homer, Plato, Socrates, people that don't typically have a role as a historian also tell us stories and tell us what's going on in Greece. And so it's contemporary for their day, it's going on during their lives, but for us, that's ancient history. So we can read about other things that are going on and use that to study with. We can't always take what's written down by these guys as truth. The Greeks like to stretch things. For instance, the Battle of Thermopylae. We're told by several Greek historians that the Spartans killed over 200,000 Persians. Sometimes that number gets inflated way higher. There's a problem with this. Modern history tells us it's more like 20,000. Quite a gap between 200,000 and 20,000. Now, we can't always take everything they say by face value, but history is written by the victor. Because the Greeks won the war, they get to tell it the way they saw it. And the way they saw it was a massive victory. And that's some of the history that we're going to see. It's also mixed in with a lot of lore, a lot of folklore, and it creates this crazy, interesting, fun, exciting world that we get to study. So one of the historians, Ovid, he tells us the story about why Greece is named Hellas. Remember, ancient Greece is called Hellas, and the reason is because it's named after Helen. Now, Ovid tells us that Helen is the son of two titans. And if we remember our Greek mythology, the Titans were the baddest thing in the universe. All right, they were the ones that started it all. And two Titans in particular saw that a great flood was coming, and it actually wiped out all of the earth. It's kind of like Noah's flood story, or even the flood story that we see with Hugh the Great. So as we can see again, flood stories are a pretty common theme between almost all of our civilizations. In fact, we can go back and we can look. Every civilization that we have faces a natural disaster through flooding. But to digress, Helen is the son of one of the Titans. In fact, the Titans, after the earth is flooded, they start throwing rocks. And where the rocks land, people spring up. And Helen was the first one. And because of this, and because he helped other city-states and villages found themselves, Helen had Greece named after him. So Hellas comes from Helen, the son of the Titans. It's what the Greeks called ancient Greece, and it is an interesting way of looking at it. It also gives us interesting points into what the Hellespont is when we talk about the connection between Greece and Turkey, from that little piece of water that goes between the Black Sea and the Aegean Sea. That little piece is called the Hellespont, or bridge to Greece. All right, and here we have ancient Greece. And again, we can see it surrounded on three sides by water. It's very important that they acclimate themselves to the water, that they use the water as a resource in order to spread out. Our first civilization that we look at that takes place in Greece begins somewhere around 3200 BC and goes to about 1100 BC. And these are the Cycladic civilization. Now, the Cycladic civilization is the oldest civilization in the region. They mostly inhabited the islands that surround Greece, and during their period, houses and temples were built out of stone. Before this time, people lived in houses that were made out of clay daubing. And if you guys remember, I know I showed you a video on this, but daubing was a style where the houses were built with timbers, and they were interwoven timbers, and to fill in that space in between it to keep the wind out, because if you just put sticks together in a weave, it's not going to necessarily keep out the wind, no matter how tight you put it. So what they did is they covered the walls in clay. The sticks held up the clay, and the clay formed very strong walls, and that allowed them to live in fairly nice houses. And I know I showed you that video on the survival channel about how to make clay daubed houses. But they stopped doing that in the Cycladic period, and they moved on to stone. And they started building houses out of stone and temples out of stone. Stone was found everywhere in Greece, and they found a way to mortar it together to create a strong central structure. The Minoan civilization. They were there from about 2700 to 1500 BC. The Minoan civilization is a group of people who lived on the islands of Crete. The island of Crete, if we look on this picture, is just south of Greece and the Ionian Sea. Now, the Minoan civilization is named after the infamous king of Crete, King Minos. King Minos is said to have had a giant labyrinth underneath his palace in which a minotaur lived, and he would throw his victims in there and they'd have to escape from the minotaur, who would cut off people's heads. So it's a really interesting story, and we didn't really know much about it until the palace was actually unearthed about 1920 or so, and more information about these people came out. Now, the Minoans developed major advancements in writing, shipbuilding, construction, ceramics, the arts, sciences, and warfare. One of the most impressive things they did is they came up with a writing system. We call it Linear A. Linear A. Now, Linear A eventually would turn into Greek. We can't actually read Linear A. It's still very hard for us to decipher, but we understand that the Minoans were writing very early on, and that made them quite an advanced group of people. One of the most amazing things they did, though, was in shipbuilding. The Minoans developed a type of sealant similar to fiberglass that they placed in between the planks and the hull of the ship. Now, fiberglass is a very hard, rigid structure that is a compound mixture, meaning it's made up of several different materials. And it's pretty strong, it's very light, and it's absolutely waterproof. And the Minoans realized how to make it. They combined linen like fabric, with resin. Resin is the sap that comes from trees, and powders to create a material that's similar to the hard cover of a textbook. This allowed Minoan ships to be faster, lighter, and more reliable. They were less likely to sink while they're in the water. This gave them a huge advantage, and they're a lot more like the ships that we see today. So if you went sailing, a ship that you went sailing on would be very close to what the Minoans were making. Now, their techniques were lost to time. In fact, we really didn't even know how to do it until we found a shipwreck far below the ocean. But for their time, they had absolutely revolutionized the way sailing took place. And some people claim that this is why they're very similar to the stories of Atlantis. Now, the Minoan shipbuilding processes only stayed in Minoa. They were a highly collected secret. Much like the secret of Greek fire, only the Greeks knew about it. Only Minoans knew how to make their ships this way. And it made it quite an astounding and astonishing method. Here's an example of what it would look like. Excuse me. Two boards were placed together. On top of that, the paper or the linen would have been placed. Then the resin and the two powders would have been placed on top of it to make that compound fiberglass mixture that would seal in the cracks in between the wood. If you put boards together, even if you glue them together, it's still likely that water can seep in through the crack. But by placing that fiberglass on the top of it, it really prevented water from coming in. And it made an excellent sealant and kept the wood very strongly together. Incredibly reliable. So King Minos used his technological advancements in shipbuilding to build a strong navy, which he conquered and colonized the Cycladic civilization. So he used this technological advancement, this incredible advancement in shipbuilding, to build a navy. And with that navy, he took over his known world. So he's a great conqueror. He takes over what he can, and the Cycladic civilization will cease to exist after he comes through. The Minoans begin to overuse the resources, though. All this shipbuilding, all these making these incredible boats is going to end up costing them. They're going to build too many. And by 1600, they begin to run out of lumber. All right, they're living on an island. There's only a small amount of lumber that they have already, and once they're blown through that, they're not going to have any. So they have to go for other islands to find more lumber. Eventually, they're going to run out. And then sometime between 1650 and 1550, a volcano on the island of Thera erupted, creating a massive tsunami that crashed into the island of Crete, destroying many of the villages and cities. This is very similar to the story that Plato tells us. Plato is an ancient Greek philosopher. He's very, very smart, but he told us a story of a town, or of a city called Atlantis. And the king the Minoans were very like the Atlanteans. Here, I'm going to give you a story that Plato wrote about it. According to the Egyptians, or rather what Plato described Critus, who is a historian, reporting what his grandfather was told by Solon, who heard it from the Egyptians. So again, it's a tale of a tale of a tale of a tale. Plato's writing us about something that was overheard many years ago by his grandfather's friend, all right, from Egyptians, so another second-hand tale. So again, we're stretching the truth here a little bit. There was a mighty power based on an island in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, probably Mediterranean. They probably didn't make it that far out. The empire was called Atlantis, and it ruled over several other islands and parts of the continents of Africa and Europe. Atlantis was arranged in centric rings of alternating water and land. The soil was rich, said Critus. The engineers technically accomplished the agricultural extravagant with baths, harbor installations, and barracks. The central plain outside the city had canals and a magnificent irrigation system. Atlantis had kings and a civil administration, as well as an organized military. The rituals matched Athens for bull baiting, sacrifice, and prayer. So, it's this incredible city. Some people said it was built in the middle of the ocean and had these rings from which land was built, and there was water access so you could work your way through, kind of like the canals in Venice. And it was always in a circle. But then it waged an unprovoked imperialistic war on the remainder of Asia and Europe. So the Atlanteans set out to conquer the world. And when Atlantis attacked, Athens showed its excellence as the leader of the Greeks. Plato is from Athens. So of course, the excellent hero here are the Athenians. When Atlantis attacked, Athens showed its excellence as the leader of the Greeks, the much smaller city-state, the only power to stand against Atlantis alone. Athens triumphed over the invading Athenian forces, defeating the enemy, preventing the free from being enslaved, and freeing those who had been enslaved. So the tiny city-state of Athens defeats Atlantis, who was technologically advanced, far superior in number, clearly the bad guy again. This is a Star Wars story. It's how the rebels defeat the Empire. This is not necessarily true, but Plato sets up this grand story. It's more of a parable. It's not meant to be taken realistically, but it was meant to tell a story of a great power. But after the battle, there was a violent earthquake and floods, and Atlantis sank into the sea, and all the Athenian warriors were swallowed up by the sea. So, of course, there is a volcano erupting on the PowerPoint slide. Clearly, volcanoes could help create a tsunami. The corresponding effects being an earthquake going along with it, the tsunami wiping out Crete, very similar to the story of Atlantis. Now, this is Minoans were far before the Athenians came to power, so no way the Athenians fought them, but it's a great way of telling the story. The Mycenaean civilization was from 1900 to 1100 BC, and they may have actually conquered the Minoans. We're not entirely sure. The archaeological evidence is a little bit sketchy. The archaeological evidence for the Mycenaeans anyway is sketchy because there's not much written down about them. The historian Arthur Homed linked the Mycenaean civilization to the war against Troy and the Iliad. The Iliad is a story of love. It's a story of war. It's a story of conquest. It's one of the greatest stories of all time. It really is quite an impressive story. I highly suggest you check it out someday. But in the Iliad, we see that the Greeks are going to fight against the Trojans, the Mycenaeans, aren't really listed, but they list Sparta, they list Athens, they list several other places, and these heroes come far and wide to fight against Troy. We see the gods getting involved, and Zeus has to say, hey gods, you gotta stay out of this, no more of this stuff. It really is a cool story. Again, it's a stretch, we're not even sure if Troy is real. There is some archaeological evidence to suggest it. But the Mycenaeans advanced the writing system. They invented linear B. So linear A from Minoans, linear B from the Mycenaeans. Linear B is actually easier to read. We understand from what we have left of linear B that it was mostly used. We can read about the trades that were made and what was sold and supplies that were bought. Kind of mundane stuff that is written down, just show shopping lists, grocery lists, some of the boring stuff that's found about civilizations. But it gives us a look into the inside of that civilization, which is something we haven't always had. The Mycenaeans advanced the writing system, and they really advanced the religion to what we know today. This really gave us the Greek knowledge that we have today. We're not really sure why the Minoans fell, but they kind of disappeared around 1100 BC, and we enter a time that we call the Greek Dark Ages, just like the Dark Ages in ancient Egypt, which followed after the collapse of the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom. We again see that here. After the collapse of the Mycenaeans, we go into a Dark Age in which not much of Greek history is written down, it's mostly lost. But out of these ashes of this time period, we're going to see the rise of city-states that begin to dominate the world and change the way that we see history. All right, so that is it today on the Mycenaean civilizations, on these early civilizations that lead to ancient Greece. Here is your exit ticket. I want you to answer the following questions in complete sentences and send your answers to me via email. So what major advancement did the Minoans make in shipbuilding? What civilization is considered to be the founders of Greek civilization? And in your opinion, what civilization that we have studied so far this year is most similar to the Greeks and why? All right, guys, that's it for today. Hey, thank you so much for paying attention. Make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you can get more notifications when I get these videos up and ready for you guys. I'm so sorry we're out of class and I can't see you, but I'm excited that you guys are still learning, and we're going to continue to rock this out no matter what we're going to learn. Nothing's going to stop us. You guys rock. I will see you in a few days.